Today's guest is Amanda Heller, U.S. Air Force veteran, former special agent, and founder of Lone Loba, a mission-driven leadership advisory practice. After serving in national security and high-stakes intelligence roles, Amanda transitioned into entrepreneurship, helping high-performing leaders build resilience, clarity, and sustainable influence from the inside out. Her story is one of identity, transition, and reclaiming personal authority. Amanda, welcome to She Vets It podcast. Now, before the uniform, before the titles, who was Amanda?
Thank you so much for that question. I was a military brat growing up. I grew up in the house of a Marine and Cuban immigrant she had come over in the 60s or I guess, like mid 60s or so. And we had kind of a lot of cultures going on in the house together all at once, various types of things, various types of languages, frankly, between English, Spanish, and then Marine Corps language. So before I had the inkling to be in the military, I was growing up around it already from, the first day that I can remember all the way to telling my dad, who was the Marine, hey, I think I want to be in the Marine Corps. And he said, no, you will not do that. My daughter will not be in the Marines. Think about the Air Force, think about the Navy. And I had the chance to think about those other options. So I got to grow up on bases, live both sides of the country, all three stateside Marine Corps bases, and got to move every couple of years, make new friends, kind of explore. And I think that was something that set me up for some success later on, just the ability to be really flexible no matter where I was or where I was new.
Oh, I love that. So it sounds like that foundation you describe as far as having your father as a Marine is what pulled you towards the military.
It was. It instilled a lot of sense of duty and a sense of there's something bigger than just myself. And that's not to say that wasn't the case on the other side of the family either. Coming from Cuba and having to set up roots and grow a community kind of from scratch, which is what my abuelo, my grandfather, did in Southern California, away from a lot of the other family that was in Miami. But that sense of duty and the sense of giving back was really, really strong on both sides. But certainly growing up around the Marine Corps and all of the Marine Corps isms, the JJ did tie buckle type of acronyms left and right, it really did put that into perspective from a very early age.
Now, you decided to join the Air Force. Your dad was a Marine. How did he feel about that?
He was so relieved I did not decide to be in the Marine Corps. He was so relieved that I decided, you know what, the Air Force has some good things going on. The big push was, he's old breed Marine Corps. This is not the Marine Corps of today even, and they're still hardcore, right? So he had come out of Desert Storm, Desert Shield some time before that as well, doing some work in Guam, doing really cool things, and had just seen, this is a rough place. This is really rough and tumble. This is a lot of work, a lot of, wear and tear on the person physically and mentally. And so when I was kind of looking at some of the other options and explored what the Air Force had to offer, that was definitely a little bit of what a relief. She's not going to go do the O course and do all these crazy things and sit on a boat for 5 months. She's going to go, do something more business-like, a little more corporate. But it was a hard line for me to say, I will not be doing the 9 to 5 sort of in an office as a bank teller or what have you. Nothing against them, just I wanted more adventure than that. So I thought the Marine Corps would be the way to go. And thankfully, my dad had the presence of mind when I was 17 to say, you know what, why don't you reconsider?
I don't know what it is about Marines, but I had the same thing happen when I was deciding to join the military. All my friends that were Marines would tell me, no, you should consider the Air Force or another branch. They're like, don't do it. As a female, don't be a Marine. I'm like, what is that about? But the women that I know that are Marines, they are gung-ho Marines and they love it. So my next question would be, when you entered the Air Force, did the reality match your expectation?
Not at all. The reality of the Air Force was also different for me than I think a lot of folks have when they join the Air Force. So I did ROTC. and worked on the commissioning program through college. And I was being prepared for sort of a regular line officer type of work. And I was expecting to go into, say, Intel or another career field, big Air Force. You've got everything leadership wise kind of set up for you. You have these whole big structures and sort of a larger community to work with. And I, got the wild hair to become an OSI special agent, Office of Special Investigations. We ran the felony investigations for all of the Air Force, anything that touched anything at all Air Force related or to some extent DoD related around the globe. And it's a very small community with a very, very small officer corps. And so all of the things that I thought I had been set up for from, being the military brat around the Marines and then being the ROTC graduate completely blew that out of the water. And within probably the first 30 days of active duty, I had already attended a couple of crime scenes and had already been filing paperwork and preparing some notes and drafts for agents who had the badge and credentials at that time. This was before I went to training, for them to be able to execute their search warrants and set up consent forms and, do all of the law enforcement stuff. And I was 21 years old. I turned 22 in training, and all of that was real fast, real uphill learning curve on that one.
That actually leads to my next question. It sounds like you said 22-year-old.
I celebrated my 22nd birthday at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. Out in town, we had a Buffalo Wild Wings, and we all did, chicken nuggets and a couple of shots of tequila.
Wow, that sounds like some great experience for a 22-year-old. Most 22-year-olds are not getting that type of experience. So my next question would be, as you served as a special agent in high pressure environments, what did that experience shape in you both professionally and personally?
It's a really interesting topic to look back on, right? Because when I was 22, 23, working on these cases, and the first probably 15, 18 months of agent life, once you've got those badge and credentials, you are working really high level, really, really stressful sexual assaults, different types of felonies. Unfortunately, we did have a lot of suicides. And I worked crimes against children primarily on my felony criminal investigation side. And that was wildly difficult to be thrown into with essentially no backdrop and no life experience either. So here you are, 22 years old. They gave you a badge and a gun. They said, go save the world. And you're excited to do it. And you lean into it and you work the cases, you work the extra hours, you set up everything you can to be successful in that investigation. And not so much for the personal benefit of that success, but to do right by the victims, the survivors, whoever is remaining in the family, whoever needs closure, and for the Air Force. So all of that stress compounded on someone who doesn't have the terminology coping mechanism, let alone the coping mechanisms to deal with it. I found that to be it wasn't something that slowed me down, but it did define the way that I handled myself outside of work. Professionally, super squared away, could handle just about anything, take the call at 3 a.m., show up where I needed to show up, talk to the people involved, talk to the victims and the survivors. And then I would, have the opportunity to go home and sit down and try and train my dog, and I would just fall apart. That personal aspect of not being able to balance those things because you didn't have the skills, there wasn't quite the setup to handle the psychology of dealing with that. And then you're also still, early on in the Air Force, early on in officer life, early on in trying to develop who you even are as a person. I think that took years after I actually separated from the Air Force and from OSI. It took a few years to unravel all of that.
Wow. So there's a strength that is developed from that experience that sometimes comes with a price. Was there anything you had to suppress in order to perform at that level?
Definitely. I think some of the things that looking back again, the hindsight's kind of 2020 on it. I certainly was repressing a lot of my own personal needs and the ability to create and maintain my own kinds of boundaries. One was just it was not a luxury that we were able to have. If I was the agent on duty and I was on call, that's just what you do. The call comes in and it's never 8 a.m. on a Monday when people commit crimes, unfortunately. So you really have to put aside your own personal needs and wants and hopes for a nice weekend or a nice trip or even a healthy relationship with someone. That is really a tough row to hoe when you are also really new to being a professional and to being part of the Air Force. And what I found to be especially difficult kind of navigating all of those, and it didn't really sink in until much later, really until after I separated and had a chance to sort of breathe and not feel like I was part of the system as much, was that the Air Force core values of integrity first, service before self, excellence in all we do. Love those. They're still core values to me, but I have to tweak that service before self because the self is really important. And who you are is what makes you a good agent. Who you are is what makes you a good airman, a good military member, a good service member, a good whatever you are. You still matter. And that service and self can coexist. And that was something that I did not know until a couple of years after I had separated and it started to form.
Wow, that's powerful. Taking off the uniform is one transition. Rebuilding identity is another. What was the hardest part about leaving the military?
I think the hardest part of leaving the military, even though I was in such a really insulated, very small career field, and the command was very, very small, we still had that sense of camaraderie and the sense of, we all went through the same training together. We all went through the same, got beat with sticks at FLETC together at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. We did all those things together and we had this common understanding. And when I transitioned out, I separated and it was probably about 6, 8 months before the COVID lockdowns happened. So what that led me to was a little bit of a scenic route career-wise, going through Texas, teaching at Angelo State University in good old San Angelo, Texas, where Goodfellow Air Force Base is, and then going over to Southern California and working at Northrop Grumman for a little while. And I had to do all of that without the support that even they had promised me when I was leaving the Air Force. Oh, you'll have this going on. You'll have that going on. You'll have these veteran support groups. You can work on these claims. You'll have sort of a community that backs you up as you are separating. And I didn't have any of that, partially because I kept roaming around and chasing the job and chasing the dollar, but also because that was not something that I found to be really instilled. And the OSI culture on the way out also wasn't really that, like, let's follow up. They had too many crimes to solve and too many national security things to dig into. So the cord that kind of connected me to everything I had known to that point had sort of just been snapped. And there was nowhere that I knew I could kind of turn to for support or for help. And certainly, I had a couple of good friends that had already separated or retired from OSI, and they kind of helped along. But throwing yourself into the wind like that, and I'm sure this has happened to a lot of folks that, at this point in time, we can kind of all commiserate because COVID hit everybody. And hitting all of us, and certainly for myself that I can speak to, changing jobs and not having a way to transition in a way that was supported and then doing all the lockdowns was a massively difficult experience. I don't think I realized even then the toll that it was taking because I was still in this place of, the service before self aspect without having the balance of service and self, without having the idea that I had some personal self-worth to offer, and without having, anything that I could hang my hat on and say, this is the career vector. This is what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to be a major. I'm supposed to get to lieutenant colonel. I'm supposed to be these things. And you're just kind of not you, but me. I was out there just kind of, what am I supposed to do now? I go to work. That's what I know how to do. And I think that is a place where I definitely could have got stuck for a long time. And there were definitely some dark periods in that period of time, trying to navigate all of that on my own and trying to deal with just like reconciling who I even was without having the badge and without having the uniform.
So it's kind of like rebuilding that structure when no one is handling it for you anymore. And then also trying to figure out what that identity is, this new person. How did you rebuild that structure when no one was handling it anymore?
It took a long time, Althea. It took years. What I will say looking back on it now was rebuilding it took one day getting up, deciding not long after I'd moved back to my home state of Colorado, waking up one morning feeling like absolute trash and just awful. Everything was kind of leading itself towards this downward spiral, mental health wise, that I was used to, especially since leaving the Air Force, and realizing just, I'm not going to put up with this anymore. I'm not going to let this happen to me anymore. I'm going to happen to it. And I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what that phrase meant. But what it ended up meaning to me was truly leaning into my own personal authority and deciding I'm in charge now. And I'm going to go and I'm going to get the support that I need, which I did not know existed at the level that it did for so long. I waited about 4.5 years to actually file my disability claim. I didn't do it on the way out like you're supposed to. I was too much stuff was going on. I had all the excuses in the world not to go in and do the claim. And I finally did it. And in order to do that claim, I had to address some really deep seated issues that had occurred while I was active duty that led to the PTSD that I got. And I ended up going to the vet center and working through a cognitive processing therapy 12-week session. And that could not recommend it enough. Every single person, every single veteran, certainly people who have experienced trauma, that cognitive processing therapy, I like to say it's not life changing, it's life empowering. It gets you to be someone who is absolutely in charge of their life. And then you open up your doors whichever way you want to go after that. And that was the most important part of the transition and kind of figuring out who I am and what I'm really all about. And a lot of those core aspects of protecting, serving, of doing right by people, of maintaining integrity, of doing good things for my community, all of those were real parts of who I was. They were just masked under a lot of people pleasing and overextending, a lot of traumatic responses, a lot of fight or flight and fawn and freeze, all of those things that we learn about as we try to start to understand how our brains respond to these triggers. Moving through that process has allowed me now to have a foundation of, yes, these things are me and those things are not me. And I've moved into what I do now because I want more people, especially veterans and female veterans in particular, to feel that also, to know you do know who you are. I was able to do it. You can do it too.
I love that. The question that I was going to ask is how did you keep yourself from spiraling? But you said that, and I wanted to find out what was that key moment. Was it a book? Was it a movie? Was it a friend? But you answered the question because you said it was the point where you were at the vet center. And I put something on Instagram, like what organization have been very helpful for you as a veteran? And someone mentioned the vet center was a game changer for them. I have not utilized them yet, but I definitely want to tap into that. That leads me into something that you were talking about earlier, PTSD, CPT, and reclaiming authority. And so you lead into how the 12-week program was helpful. So the next question would be, what did tackling PTSD or actually look like for you? And not the polished version, but the real version.
Okay, we definitely can be real. I had gone into this process with no PTSD diagnosis. I didn't want anything on my quote unquote record. I didn't want the stigma that I had about it. I could, look at other people and understand, oh, you've gone through some deep stuff. But I was like, no, that's doesn't affect me. I was invincible. This was stuff that I was expected, and the standard was to do these things and to handle it. So for a very long time, I just refused outright that could be something that was going on in my brain. And that, as you can imagine, is not always the best place to work from. So when I had sort of not even come to the realization that, hey, maybe I do have something going on upstairs that we can look at and maybe potentially fix, I would kind of get in these cycles where I would work really hard. I would overwork. I would kind of lose that work-life balance. I would see it slipping. And then I would kind of get into this emotional eating and drinking phases. And that would lead to sitting for a couple hours after a full high functioning workday, either drinking, overeating, and then like just dissociating, watching Netflix, just checking out. And it was, you know, thank goodness for my dog, because she needs a couple walks a day and she needs attention and she needed exercise and enrichment and all that good stuff. So that was about the only tether to sanity, quote unquote, that I had, was my dog Dulce. So when I started to see this after I moved back to Colorado, because one of my big pushes was to intentionally move somewhere where I could live my life in a way that I didn't feel like escaping from it anymore. So that cycle going for years and years, and then seeing these mini cycles happening while I was kind of new to where I really wanted to enjoy life to the fullest, I had to stand up for myself at some point and just say, no, I'm not doing this anymore. I am not going to allow this to happen. And that led me to going into the vet center and having the conversation with them. Look, this is what's going on. This is what I've experienced. What happened? And that was a legitimate question that I had, because I had not realized what I had experienced had impacted me so much in so many deep-seated, deep-rooted ways that impacted the way that I was able and not able to actually live my life. And when I say that, like, to be more clear about and just more, I guess, explicit about how that was, like, I was losing hours, and those hours were adding up to months and potentially years of adventures, of hanging out with the dog, of meeting people that could build my community with me, of seeing kind of what else was in the world, of exploring what civilian life even meant. I had lost about 4.5, 5 years of that from the time that I left the Air Force to the time that I decided, okay, maybe there was some trauma. Maybe there's something to fix here. And that was moving from that space to the space that I'm in now. It wasn't a one morning you turn on the light and you're like, wow, I'm solved. Everything is healed. It was definitely a process where I started to see a lot more good than I was seeing bad. And I was noticing I was responding to things differently. That was a whole tirade, but we got there.
Oh no, I love that. I was taking notes because what I heard was, one is accepting those flaws and being able to communicate them. Because as long as we pretend like we don't have an issue, we can never heal from it.
Very true.
And so it's like taking that self accountability and looking in the mirror and saying, hey, I got to deal with X, Y, and Z. And if I don't communicate it, and if I don't, and I'm scared of this stigma and I don't want to identify, you don't have to identify with it, but you can, you know, accept that these are some challenges that I'm dealing with, so that you can now talk to someone about it, so that you can get the help and you can start applying it to your life, so that you can at least make it more manageable. Because sometimes,
Yes.
sometimes it's not always that you're going to just go without any problems. Sometimes you will get back to the point where you will struggle from time to time. Something may trigger you and you may have a setback. However, you're able to use some of the coping mechanisms to help you get through. It may not necessarily cure, but it makes it easier. Your quality of life was gone because you were swimming in your trauma. So you lose time. I always say we could be experiencing a slow suicide, and a slow suicide could be drinking.
Yes.
It could be not taking care of ourselves. And so now we're not getting the proper nutrition. Now our heart health, all the different things that you do to take care of yourself, you're no longer doing. And so suicide does not come immediate, and some are just as slow. Now your hygiene and your dental health is bad because you're not willing to show up for yourself.
Right.
So,
right. I think there is a lot to be said for a lot of folks, especially in our communities, who kind of get caught up in that. And it is, when you're in it, like, you are in quicksand and you are doing your best just to stay, to keep your head above that quicksand before you get sucked under. But there is a way out. And there are hands that are reaching to help pull you out of there. And that's a major thing that I learned out of this transition and this transformation for me.
And that leads to this question is, for someone listening who might be skeptical or afraid, what does CPT actually help rewire?
That's amazing. I love talking about CPT, cognitive processing therapy. And again, like to caveat, I am not a psychologist or a licensed therapist myself, but I absolutely love this modality. It was built for veterans who had experienced different types of traumas and ended up with PTSD. And basically, what it does is it helps you shift the tolerance for triggers of something traumatic or something dangerous. The way that trauma wires us is to hold on to things in a way that is basically gets us stuck. It puts us into stuck points. So we create these beliefs that I am an unworthy person because of the trauma that I experienced. I shouldn't be here. I have survivor's guilt. I shouldn't be someone that should still be working. I shouldn't have these wonderful opportunities in front of me. So I'm going to stay stuck in these places, or even things that are related to safety. I will not be safe if I go to this type of event by myself. And that can be something as simple as going to the movies by yourself or going out to eat, because you have this instilled, deeply held belief that the world is not safe, that you cannot trust yourself anymore, that you cannot share intimacy with other people. And that's not even romantically, it's also in regular types of community building relationships. So what CPT helps you do is address those stuck points kind of one-on-one. And you can start with a list. I think I started with a list of over 30 stuck points of things that I truly believed were true of myself. I thought, I am a trash person. I'm easily discarded. My voice does not matter. And all of that was compounded after years and years and years of all these experiences. CPT helped me dive into that and understand why that was a stuck point. But beyond that, what I thought was really great about CPT was it's an action step. You can learn, and the other piece you don't have to do is rehash all of your trauma specifically and kind of go through that line by line and re-experience it. That part, you kind of keep that to yourself. You're focusing on how the trauma impacted you and the beliefs that you have because of it. So when you go and you take that action step with CPT, you're not just talking about what your stuck point is and why you are the way you are at this point. You're actually unraveling and creating new neural pathways to change that stuck point. So you find out that stuck point's just a belief. It's not a fact. You might think you've got evidence for it and you've convinced yourself the evidence is facts, but they're actually emotions and responses. Emotions and responses aren't necessarily facts. So then you start looking at what facts are and rebuilding what your brain allows you to see in front of you as things are happening. And it's a little bit of a process, but it absolutely does help you essentially take a trail that's a well-worn trail you've been on for years and years and years, but the trail kind of veered off from the main part of what the park rangers are maintaining. And now you get the chance to put yourself back on that main trail and kind of get all those weeds and brushes out of the way so that you can kind of hit that trail the way that you are meant to hit it. And that's what CPT does. It's not flimsy. It is not something to be taken lightly, but it is absolutely life empowering in that way, because it really does help you change that neural pathway so you're on your correct trail again.
Thank you so much for sharing about CPT. I want to go into the next point about finding purpose again. And at some point, survival turns into rebuilding. And when did you feel the shift from just managing life to reclaiming purpose?
I think that is really a good question, because I think to some extent I'm still in that now. I think we have waves, ebbs and flows of purpose, and then kind of feeling, all right, I'm drifting away. But I feel like I am actually in a position in life where I'm equipped. I have that foundation that I kind of talked about earlier. I know I know who I am and what my foundation is after a lot of this work. And this allows me to say, okay, well, this isn't aligning with my purpose and my philosophy anymore. This isn't aligning with where I want to be in life in 5 years, 10 years, however many, 3 months in some cases. And that allows me to be able to shift and say, for me, some of purpose is exploring and going on the adventure of learning, of growing, of seeing what else is out there. I've called them side quests, where I became a notary public, and now I can help folks who a lot of elderly folks that need a mobile notary, so I can kind of wander around and meet interesting people and hear about their lives and their stories. And for me, that's part of the purpose. I absolutely love being able to do that. So when I start to feel that I'm kind of getting a little too hemmed in left and right, and there's a little bit too much top heavy pressure, that's where I start to realize, okay, maybe this isn't quite aligned anymore. And having that basis of self-confidence, of self-worth, and that self-esteem that I had to work on over years, especially transitioning out and becoming a real civilian, all of that foundation lets me do that in a way that is still fun and lets me play with life and still, be able to help people in that core value sense that I was talking about, where like those things are very real, and I can still do those things to give back to my community and build people up without losing myself in the process.
Yes, you mentioned entrepreneurship, like you tapped into your entrepreneur spirit. And I was going to ask you what made you believe that you were ready to lead others, but you pretty much answered that, the confidence and the feeling that you felt when you were helping and meeting different people.
And I'll tell you too, Althea, one of the main early drivers was because I work with a lot of venture capitalists, a lot of other entrepreneurs. At first, one of my first thoughts was, man, if that guy can do it, I can do it. And I kind of hung on to that little bit of spite and pettiness until I was like, you know what? I actually can do this. I can incorporate a couple of businesses and see where it goes. I can take the swing.
Yes. And it reminded me of me when I started She Vets It on Clubhouse, and people were just going into the rooms and having conversations. And I think I shared with you offline a young lady who experienced a traumatic brain injury,
Right.
but she started a nonprofit for helping individuals that experience traumatic brain injuries. And I was like, oh my gosh, if she can do it, I can do it too. But I had to get over the idea of not being perfect and being okay with who I was,
Right.
making mistakes. My words don't always flow the way I want it to flow, doing it scared,
Yes.
showing up and not being scared and so critical about myself, because sometimes it's the inner thoughts that kind of slows us down. And yes, I'm not perfect, but the fact that I show up, there's people who speak better, more eloquently, more than I do, or better than me, but they're not doing it.
True.
And so if I just show up, I'm ahead of the curve. Just showing up.
Just showing up. And that is massive because, and I know you know this too, that's why we're having this conversation, but sometimes just showing up is all it takes to help shift someone else's perspective. And if I can help shift one person's perspective, especially another veteran, that is a mission accomplished right there. All I had to do was show up, and that person now has a new concept or something that they're ready to try. Let's go. We got this.
Exactly. That leads me to the next point. How did Lone Loba become the vehicle for the next chapter?
Lone Loba started as a creative outlet a couple of years ago. I thought that I was going to be a big time podcaster, and I thought that I was going to be very creative in like art and different types of media. And what happened while I was starting to talk to people who I might have kind of interviews with or sit down and ask them their stories, I ended up actually working with them sort of in this behavioral psychology related to what I'd learned from CPT without diagnosing or any of that stuff, not crossing those lines at all, and sharing some of the goal setting and the strategy setting and understanding of some of those foundations that I was talking about. This is what this means for me. What does that mean for you? And those conversations developed into this very informal, what I've now more crystallized into a little bit of a methodology that has become sort of this transformation coaching process that I call the Lone Loba alignment method, because we're getting to a place where we are aligned with who we are in our core and who we want to be. So we're living authentically. So Lone Loba started just as friends, family, other people that were sharing their experiences that felt comfortable enough to share that with me. And over the last couple of years, especially the last probably 6-7 months or so, people have been telling me, you know what, you got to do this full time. And it just so happened to link up with some other things that were no longer aligning with me. And instead of pushing myself to align with things that don't match my philosophy, I decided, you know what, I'll take the swing. If those guys can do it, the Cuban American, daughter of a Marine, I'm pretty sure I can make this happen.
I love that. So for someone joining the military today, what would you tell them to prepare themselves, not just for a successful career, but for a healthy transition later?
The number one thing is to lean on and keep your support structure, your community inside and outside of the military. That's where you're going to turn when you no longer have rank on your sleeve. When you no longer have that easy reach to get on base, to hang out to go bowling at MWR, you're not stuck on the deployment with all of your 30 favorite best friends in life. And then you leave and you go back to your other 30 best friends back in your squadron or your platoon or wherever you're going. Having that outside community and keeping touch with the civilian world is really, really helpful. I think there is a lot of value in it. It was an all hands that I sat in at Shaw Air Force Base not too long before I separated. And I had just come back from the Middle East working some OSI stuff. And we sat in and listened to the base commander give a speech about how he was retiring soon. And you got to remember, after your 20 years, you still have a lot of life left. You still have your spouse and your kids, and you still have, your friends and your neighbors and all of that. And I don't know if he was really living up to what he was preaching either, but the message I think did hit home. And I think we're in a generation, especially the next few generations coming forward, that are the future of our military. You can be both. You can do service and self, and you can do that well. And you can have a community that is active duty and keep touch with sort of regular reality, which is a lot more of the percentage of the population. And what you learn in the military is 100% translatable to your civilian life, because that civilian life will be there no matter what. You will get there. You will have it. So be ready for it. Stay connected.
So for veterans who feel stuck between who they were and who they're becoming, what would you say directly to them?
I would say go for it. Lean in. You are worth every second of effort in discovering and living who you really are. It's scary. It's terrifying in some cases. Some days you will cry. Some days you will want to punch walls. Please don't do that. Some days you will want to go for a 30-mile run and then, just sleep for 3 days because your CNS is shot. But it is worth every second. And we are no strangers to pain and suffering, and we are no strangers to struggling. We've already done that, been there, done that. We literally have the t-shirts. So go for it. This time you're not doing it for any other reason than to make you and your community and your people better. And that gives back to the rest of the veterans. That gives back to the rest of the people you live around. That gives back to the country. We need you. So go for it.
And finally, how do you define purpose now?
I think I define purpose now as not so much what kind of gets me going in the morning, but more this underlying current of this is going to move us all ahead. It's sort of a take on rising tides lift all ships. So purpose has kind of shifted from I give and that is all I do. I give and I overgive and I work, and that there is fulfillment in giving. And yet that doesn't quite hit that fulfillment of purpose. The purpose is sort of more being part of the community that does rise all these, that tide. Like when you are part of the whole in that way where you are giving and receiving, that allows you to be that tide that does lift all these ships. And we go further faster together that way. And that's how I would define purpose today, as opposed to 5, 10, 15 years ago.
Well, Amanda, thank you for your honesty and your leadership. Your journey reminds us that transition is not the end of identity. It's the refinement of it, from military service to empowering leaders through Lone Loba. You continue to serve with purpose. And to everyone that's listening, if you're navigating change, remember, you're not starting over, you're evolving. So I just want to thank you so much for being here and sharing your journey. And how can we support you, and how can our listeners connect with you?
Thank you so much, Althea. I've got an Instagram page at lone.loba.aligned, and my website is loneloba.com. It's a mix of English and Spanish, so that's what you're looking for. You're looking for the female wolf, L-O-B as in boy, or Bravo, A. Those are the couple of spots that I've got set up for now. I am setting up some virtual online events that I'll be putting on Eventbrite and on my website, and that is intended to hit as many of our friends and veteran family around the world as possible. So please keep a lookout for those. And that would be a huge help to see you guys in some of those events coming up.
Awesome. Until next time, thank you so much for our listeners who listened in. Follow us on shevetted.com for other great guests. Again, thank you.